now, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. The number. How much is Trump pocketing off the presidency? That's the headline of an exhaustive new investigation published by the New Yorker magazine. In the piece, journalist David Kirkpatrick writes, quote, many payments now flowing to Trump, his wife and his children and their spouses would be unimaginable without his presidencies. A $2 billion investment from a fund controlled by the Saudi Crown Prince, a luxury jet from the Emir of Qatar, profits from at least 5 different ventures peddling crypto, fees from an exclusive club stocked with cabinet officials and named executive branch. In March, Forbes estimated that Trump's net worth had more than doubled over a year to $5 billion. And a few months later, the New York Times estimated Trump's wealth had grown to $10 billion. But these estimates and others did not attempt to look at how exactly his fortune is growing. David Kirkpatrick writes, quote, although the notion that Trump is making colossal sums off the presidency has become commonplace, nobody could tell me how much he's made. I decided to attempt to tally up just how much Trump and his immediate family have pocketed off his time in the White House, unquote. Well, David Kirkpatrick joins us now in our New York studio. Welcome to Democracy Now! It's great to have you with us. Explain how you arrived at the number and what are is the period of time that he has made this money?
Well, what's important here is that I'm trying to be fair to the president. I'm not out to get Trump here. I went through and looked at all the sources of income, the income streams flowing into the Trump organization, the president and his family, and I asked, is this money that he would have made absent the presidency? Because he's got hotels, he's got golf courses. Sometimes people go there just to play golf or rent a hotel room. We're not talking about that. So I only wanted to look at money that he has made because he is or has been in the White House. And then I tried to ask as best I could, what is each one of those things worth? And that's how I came up with $3.4 billion. And again, I think what I hope will make this report credible, and the reason I urge people to read it is that I've tried as best I can to be fair. I've shown all my work, and people can make their own conclusions.
And David, could you talk about some of the specifics from the small to the big? For instance, the ubiquitous MAGA hat at Trump rallies. How is Trump has a private store that sells these? Could you talk about that? And also the family's investments in crypto.
Yeah, the hats. I was quite surprised to realize that in addition to the campaign merchandise sold by his campaign, which all candidates and all presidents do, that's money that goes into the campaign coffers that he can't really touch for personal purposes. The Trump organization also has its own online store, and they sell all kinds of Trump merchandise that looks very much like its campaign merchandise. But this money flows to Trump and himself. You know, $20, $40 for a pair of flip-flops, a pair of beer koozies, a baseball hat. He's making, you know, millions of dollars. You know, I don't know, forget what the exact number was, but $20 million over the last few years selling this kind of merchandise, which is arguably competing with his own campaign and diverting some of the money that his supporters might think is supporting the MAGA movement and his candidates to his own pocket. That's the small end. Nobody thinks that anybody who's paying $50 for a baseball hat is actually going to get any influence, you know, over the president in return for that. That's just a way of making money. On the other extreme, there's significant amounts of money flowing into the Trump organization now through its various, or the president's various crypto enterprises. Some of these, you know, predate his return to the White House, but I tried to look here at all the money that he made off of the White House over the course of the 2 terms and the time in between when he remained a kind of kingmaker in the Republican Party. So. And most of it has happened around his second term, you know, shortly before through his second term. In terms of crypto, you know, should I go through and break down all the ways they're making money off of crypto?
Yes.
Okay, well, here you go. So first of all, for people who might not be familiar with crypto, all it is really is a kind of online ledger or spreadsheet keeping track of who owns what. there's a number of ways that the Trump family has tried to take advantage of this new technology. He started out by selling NFTs, non-fungible tokens, which are basically sort of digital cartoons of himself. Then he moved on to setting up a company. His son set up a company called World Liberty Financial, and that's done a couple things. It sold a kind of token or online certificate that would ostensibly allow somebody to vote on whatever its futures plans in the crypto business might be. They raised, $550 million selling those tokens, and 75% of that flows to the Trump Organization. Then it went into a new business selling what's known as a stable coin. A stable coin is basically the online equivalent of a dollar. It's not really an investment. It's just a kind of like almost a checking account. It's a way to transfer money here and there, perhaps more efficiently by doing it digitally. For the company, World Liberty Financial, they get to make money off of investing that money in treasuries while it's out in the world circulating as a stablecoin. So they go into the stablecoin business. Their first customer is a company owned by the United Arab Emirates that puts up $2 billion to buy a stablecoin. While that money is out circulating as stablecoin, they're going to get about 4% a year on that, I calculate, by investing it in short-term treasuries. So that's a couple. There's a few others he's gone into. His meme coin is perhaps the most famous. President Trump, right around the time he was elected, before he was inaugurated, went into this business selling a kind of online novelty. Basically just a joke. It's a kind of digital certificate that just allows you to say, I paid money to own a little Trump novelty. That's it. That's all it is. There's nothing to it. And it doesn't even purport to sort of hold wealth, although you can trade it back and forth. He's made about $300 million selling those meme coins. And the last thing is a little bit of kind of a financial engineering that his company, Trump Media and Technology Group, a publicly traded company of which he's the chairman, a little bit of financial engineering that company has done. Now, that is the company that owns Truth Social. Truth Social is a very small online, platform, social media platform. It doesn't have much revenue, maybe $1 million a quarter. It's never really made a profit. It doesn't have much chance of ever making a profit. And yet the stock that owns it, Trump Media and Technology Group, trades at a kind of surprisingly high price. And people on Wall Street consider it a meme stock. It trades basically on how people feel about President Trump. And in the last couple months, really in June, that company has done a remarkable thing, which is they've issued new shares of stock. They've sold the stock at their inflated meme coin price, and they've taken that money and they've bought Bitcoin. They've also done the same thing to try to stockpile some cash, but they bought about $2.3 or $2.4 billion worth of Bitcoin, and they've stockpiled about $760 million worth of cash. So in the end of the last quarter, they said, look, we've got $3.1 billion of liquid assets on our books. So I calculate that since President Trump owns 42% of that company, he has an ownership interest in that $3.1 billion. So as I was doing this reporting over the last few months, my calculation of their net worth, of his net worth, bumped by, I shouldn't say his net worth, of the amount of money he's made off the presidency, jumped up by $1 billion.
Other members of the family, for instance, Jared Kushner and his daughter, in terms of the investments by foreign governments, sovereign funds in them, and what that looks like?
I think you're thinking about Jared Kushner's private equity firm. So after Trump left the White House in 2020, his son, Jared Kushner, who had been in real estate, went into private equity, a new line of work, and he went to the Persian Gulf to solicit money, and he asked the sovereign wealth fund of Saudi Arabia to invest. Their panel of advisors said this is a mistake. He doesn't have a track record in private equity, only real estate. There could be some public relations problem here. People are going to say this is a payoff to the family of a president. The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who controls the public investment fund, overruled that and nonetheless invested the $2 billion with Jared Kushner's private equity firm. Since then, he's accumulated as much as $4.8 billion in assets under management, almost all of it from foreign sources, quite a bit of it also from the United Arab Emirates and Qatar. Under standard private equity terms, he would get 2% a year of that money as asset management fees. With Saudi Arabia, it's a little bit lower. But that is also, I'm counting, as money flowing into the Trump family coffers as a result of their time in the White House.
Can you tell us, David, about the family? I mean, in the first term, many of them were advisors to President Trump. They were in the White House. They would have to deal with ethics rules. We don't see that right now. So I'm wondering how the family business has changed from the first term to the second term. And I also wanted to ask you about, for example, President Trump says he struck a trade agreement with Vietnam. He'll apply a 20% tariff on Vietnamese imports, down from the 46% he threatened. The reported deal comes just weeks after the Trump Organization broke ground on a $1.5 billion golf course in Vietnam. A few questions there.
Yeah, a few questions there. So during the first term, President Trump, on his way into office, volunteered that he and his family were not going to do any deals overseas because they didn't like the way that looked, right? It raises the specter that some foreign interest or even foreign government is going to try to buy favor with the U.S. government by paying Trump and his family privately. During the second term, the family has said, we're not going to do that anymore. We're no longer going to abstain from those deals. Donald Trump Jr. has said publicly, look, we restrained ourselves last term and people accused us of profiteering anyway. So we're not going to lock ourselves in, quote unquote, the proverbial padded room. We're just going to go ahead and be businessmen and do as many deals as we can. And they've done quite a few. Now, again, in my accounting, I'm not including deals which appear to be extensions of the business they were in before he was elected. You know, he had licensed his name for use on 4 condominium buildings around India before he ever went into the White House. Now there are 5 more Indian projects. Fine, let's leave that aside. That's more or less legitimate Trump business. On the other hand, since late 2022, when he was really the presumptive Republican presidential nominee, he's had a whole flurry of new deals around the Persian Gulf with one Saudi Arabian company, and that's in, you know, Oman, the United Arab Emirates, a couple in Saudi Arabia, and one in Qatar. And I don't think there's any way those would have happened without the presidency. And that adds up to, I would say, you know, guessing as best I can, the various income streams involved. That's more than $100 million right there in terms of its present value. You mentioned the Vietnam project. That's another one that I think, you know, would not have unfolded as it has were he not returning to the White House. That is probably, you know, physically going to be the largest Trump branded property in the world. Its planned size is about 3 times as big as Central Park with 54 holes of golf. It's very hard to know how much the Trump family is actually going to make out of that property. On his most recent financial disclosure form, he said that the Trump Organization had already received $5 million in initial licensing fees from lending their name to that property. He's not going to build it. He's not going to own it. They're just lending their name and some management services. So I figure over 10 years, which is kind of a minimum term for a management or licensing agreement, he's likely to make at least $50 million with a present value of about $40 million. Probably it'll be a lot more than that.
And how much of this is, in your perspective, is legal, and also how much of it is unprecedented for a president?
As far as I can tell, it's all legal. You know, I don't have any evidence of a quid pro quo. I don't have any evidence of a specific instance where he has explicitly sold a public favor for personal profit. And the remedy that our laws prescribe for potential conflicts of interest is disclosure. Elected officials disclose what they own and how they're making money, and the voters or the Congress can decide what's appropriate or inappropriate. And I guess we'll have to see how voters feel about that. The other part of your question, I think, was what again?
How much of this is unprecedented for a president?
Oh, yeah. Well, a lot of that's been widely reported. There's nothing like this before, right? A lot of presidents make money after they leave, selling books, various other endeavors. But he and his family are making this money while he's in the White House, and the scale is really quite novel.
And in the last 10 seconds, you talk about the frenzy.
Well, that's right. What really surprised me about all this is just how fast they're making this money. They seem to turn down no opportunity, and that's what makes the questions about a conflict of interest all the more pressing, because I feel like when they are so evidently zealous, so eager to make money, it really sharpens the question of what a buyer, so to speak, might be getting for that.
David Kirkpatrick, I want to thank you so much for being with us, reporter with The New Yorker. We'll link to your piece, The Number. How much is Trump pocketing off the presidency? Thanks for watching Democracy Now! On YouTube. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to make sure you never miss a video. And for more of our audience-supported journalism, go to democracynow.org, where you can download our news app, sign up for our newsletter, subscribe to the daily podcast, and so much more. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. A group of 8 U.S. senators have formed what they call a fight club to force Minority Leader Senator Chuck Schumer to oppose Trump more aggressively and to back more populist candidates in the 2026 midterms. The group includes Democrats Chris Van Hollen of Maryland, Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, Independent Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont. For more, we're joined by a lifelong activist who's run for president 4 times. Ralph Nader is a longtime consumer advocate, corporate critic, founder of the Capitol Hill Citizen newspaper, where his front-page piece in the current issue is headlined, "Congress is there for the taking. Now is the time to take it." It's also the 60th anniversary of his book, Unsafe at Any Speed, which took on major corporations, in that case, GM. Ralph, before we go to Unsafe at Any Speed and what this 60th anniversary means, if you can talk about this fight club and say what you mean about Congress is up for the taking and it should be taken.
Well, there are 535 men and women in Congress. They put their shoes on like we do every morning. They are possessed of the delegated power under the Constitution of the citizens. That's why the preamble to the Constitution starts, "We the people," not "we the Congress." And so we have 435 congressional districts, and there's no organization, Congress watchdog groups with reasonable staff in any of those organizations, in any of those districts, to monitor and push members of Congress in the right direction. So 1,500 corporations pretty much get their way on Capitol Hill, and the result is devastating. Congress is the main tool to challenge the entrenched corporate supremacists that are controlling this country. They're strategizing and planning our entire society, whether it's the tax system or public lands or the social safety net or energy or health insurance and health care. And so I wrote this article, which is really quite obvious, because the history of our country shows that when the people rise up, it takes less than 1% of them reflecting public opinion, focusing on the Congress, and knowing what they're talking about, to defeat the corporate lobbies. We did it on auto safety with about 1,000 people around the country. We didn't have the money or campaign contributions, but we had the evidence that they were killing people in unsafe cars, and that they knew, and their engineers knew, but were suppressed, how to build cars that could prevent death and injury and make the cars more fuel efficient and less polluting. So we have these examples, which I put in my new book, Civic Self-Respect, just to try to get people to stop giving up on themselves, stop being cynical, which leads to withdrawal, and develop a process of summoning the senators and representatives to their own town meetings choreographed by the citizenry in town halls or school auditoriums where there's no intermediate flacks, and the senators and representatives have to hear the agenda of the people. The big deception in this country, Amy, is polarization. They keep talking about polarization: red state, blue state, conservative, liberal, fighting each other. There is huge consensus by conservative and liberal voters in this country on major agendas to improve their livelihoods. It's minimum wage, it's cracking down on corporate crooks who are bleeding consumer dollars and savings, it's universal health insurance, it's tax reform, taxing the super rich and the corporations that are very undertaxed comes into 85%. Breaking up the big banks after the Wall Street collapse came to close to 90%. The process of deceiving the people in divide and rule goes back to over 2,000 years, and we've got to confront it directly. Every day, for example, we see the press reporting corporate crime, frauds, abuses, and the Congress doesn't pay any attention. Even under the Democrats, they didn't have the requisite public hearings that inform and mobilize people so they can basically tell their Congress who they work for in the first place. So I wrote this article in Capital Citizen. You can go to capitalcitizen.com to get a copy of the Capital Citizen, in order to show people their own history and to wake them up and to recover Congress. But you do it by personal lobbying of your Senate representative, just like the two powerful lobbies, AIPAC and NRA. They don't deal with marches and demonstrations. They deal with personal lobbying on the staff, on the members. They know the friends back home, their lawyers, their doctors, who they play golf with. So we really have to focus on this. Just like, week after week you expose the mass murder in Gaza. It shouldn't be called ethnic cleansing. It's mass slaughter. It's genocide.
Ralph, if I can ask you though,
Congress. It's in the White House. That's where the focus has to be.
Ralph, if I can ask you though, your idea of Congress is there for the taking presumes that we are in ordinary liberal or neoliberal democracy. There are many people who fear that this next November election, that the Trump and the Republican Party are determined to declare victory no matter what the vote total is, and will use any means necessary to maintain themselves in power. I'm wondering about your sense of this this growing fascism in the country and the ability of even a democratic vote to take place in November.
Well, clearly, we're seeing a rapidly entrenching dictatorship. This is not authoritarianism. It's a dictatorship. He's violating laws right and left. He's violating the Constitution. He's open about it. He's protected by the Supreme Court decision of last year, Trump versus U.S., which basically says he can't be criminally prosecuted. And the Congress is run by the GOP. Well, one thing he fears, Juan, is impeachment. He's been impeached twice, and twice the majority of senators wanted to remove him, but they didn't get the two-thirds number required by the Constitution. The one tool that the people have is impeachment. Now, in September 15th, that's over 2 months ago, there was a Celinda Lake poll in swing districts in the United States showing 49% want him impeached, 44% opposed. And things have gotten much worse now. He's pushing the envelope on savagery. He's moving us not from an autocracy. He's in a dictatorship, bleeding into a police state. Look what he's doing to the citizens in the cities and the immigrants, even legal immigrants. And there are manifestations of terror that are starting. So the focus has to be on impeachment. And there'll be a large majority of people in favor of it. And the Republicans in Congress are starting to crack on their sycophancy in fear of Trump because they're going to be up for re-election in 2026, and he is not. When Nixon won 49 out of 50 states and came in with 60% popularity in less than 2 years because of the Watergate scandal, he was out. They were about to impeach and remove him. Why? Because the Republicans saw disaster coming in the 1974 elections, and it was their political skin vis-a-vis Nixon. They're going to save their political skin, and that's exactly what's happening now. And Nixon's transgressions, Juan, were less than 1% of the crimes and violations and brutality and cruelty and viciousness against millions of defenseless, powerless, and impoverished Americans. He, like the bully he is, he doesn't go after the contented classes. He facilitates corporate welfare. He shuts down corporate prosecutions in the Justice Department. But what he's going after are the tens of millions of people who are unorganized, who are poor, who are sick, disabled, Medicaid, you know, things you reported on your show, cutting off food supplements. We're talking about tens of millions of Americans.
Ralph?
So the impeachment has got to be the focus.
I wanted to ask you about this anniversary. 60 years ago this week, November 30th, 1965, you published your landmark book, Unsafe at Any Speed, The Design-In Dangers of the American Automobile. You went on to win a major settlement against GM, General Motors, for spying on you, trying to discredit you, trying to set you up with women, etc. And you used the lawsuit's proceeds to start the Center for the Study of Responsive Law. This is a clip from an interview you did 60 years ago on the safety flaws of GM Chevrolet Corvair.
What aggravates the problem is that the rear wheels of the Corvair begin to tuck under. And as they tuck under, the angle of tuck under is called camber. And as they tuck under, it can go from 3 or 4 degrees camber to 11 degrees camber almost in an instant. And when that happens, nobody can control the Corvair.
Well, then surely they did the right thing. They found out there was something wrong with the car and they fixed it.
Yes, the question is, why did it take them 4 years to find out? This is my point. Either it's sheer callousness or indifference, or they don't bother to find out how their cars behave.
That's Ralph Nader in 1965. His book, Unsafe at Any Speed, just marked its 60th anniversary. Ralph, this was bigger than the Corvair, though so significant, what you were able to do in passing new auto safety laws. You were taking on large corporations and exposed how they would retaliate, for example, spying on you. In this last minute that we have, not with you. You're going to stay with us for the next segment because we're going to talk about the WTO protests in 1999, a new documentary. Talk about the trajectory from 65 to now in trying to protect people in this country against corporations.
Well, I published Unsafe at Any Speed in 1965, Amy. GM tripped over it with their private detective scandal. It reached the Congress. Senator Ribicoff held highly publicized hearings. Then Senator Magnuson had hearings on motor vehicle safety standards, which didn't exist at that time. And the laws were passed. An auto safety agency was set up in the Department of Transportation called NHTSA. Millions of lives have been saved. Other countries importing into the U.S. had to meet the higher crashworthiness standards of the U.S. and recall requirements. None of that can be done today. None of that can be done today. There are great books coming out exposing all kinds of corporate crimes, forever chemicals, and all kinds of devastation of people's livelihoods. And they go nowhere because our civic institutions, our democratic institutions, for the most part, have collapsed. And the corporations have continued 24/7. The nature of the corporate beast, it never stops, to control more and more of our country, to control more and more of our local city councils, state legislatures, Congress, massive campaign contributions, 400 to 500 drug industry lobbyists assigned to Congress alone, for example, full time. And that's what we have to face up to. But we outnumber these corporations. We are the only ones mentioned in the Constitution. There's no mention of corporation or company or political parties indentured to them in the Constitution. So why are we letting them support? Why do we let them control and rule us? That's the question that has to be asked of ourselves. And it only takes 1% or less of the people to defeat these corporations. That's about 2.5 million organized people in 435 districts. Already a woman who lost her 2 daughters due to defective truck designs in North Carolina is starting the first Congress watchdog group. And we're going to have her on my radio podcast. But I want people to read my book, Civic Self-Respect, because it applies to everybody in the country. The table of contents starts out, I the citizen, I the worker, I the consumer shopper, I the taxpayer, I the voter, I the parent, I the veteran, and how the people, without disrupting their normal routines, can add a civic dimension to all those roles every day.
Thanks for watching Democracy.